why do we see a bond on some projects? We don't see a bond on others.
Yep.
What even is that bond for?
In the surety world, so a surety bond, most of your listeners probably get a licensed contractor bond for their state, right? So that's a very simple bond, costs you a few $100, and it just tells the state that you're going to be a responsible contractor. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about payment and performance bonds, which is a specific type of surety bond. And there's federal legislation, and then there's also state legislation that requires that public funded projects be bonded. This is where the bonding requirement comes from. And what that bond will say is, let's say your Department of Transportation issues a $100 million contract to build a new bridge over a river. What it's going to say is the general contractor on that project must be bonded in order to ensure that the public money is used well. They're not going to abscond with the money and fail to deliver the project. So then you enter this whole different class of entity to the construction world, which is surety companies. Surety companies are very similar to insurance companies. Sometimes they share both functions. They have deep pockets, and they say, we know ABC Contracting, and we're going to guarantee to the state of Georgia that ABC Contracting will build that bridge. And then the surety, obviously, if they're putting their money where their mouth is, they're going to do their due diligence to ensure that ABC Contracting can indeed fulfill the contract. And what that is involving is, do they have the money? Do they have the right people and resume to execute the work? Do they have the character? They're going to stand behind the contract that they sign rather than, when things get tough, turn around and say, well, I check out. I'm not going to do the work. So that's where surety bonds came from. You'll see them sometimes on private work. Let's say a large development with diverse funds coming into it. You'll see it on affordable housing projects. So really, it's from the owner side and sometimes the government side that requires the bond, and then everybody below has to comply.
So that's insurance, but I'm going to do what I say, finish what I've signed up to start.
It is. And what's important to note for everybody who hasn't really gone through the bonding world is it's very different from insurance. Let's say insurance, we're all familiar with car insurance. You get in a car accident and your car insurance company writes a check for $50,000 to replace your car. Maybe it's the car you hit. They don't then come knock on your door, Eddie, and say, Eddie, I spent $50,000. You need to pay me back the $50,000. That is exactly how surety works, though. Surety, if you are the contractor and you are applying for a bond, you're going to sign an agreement to the bonding company saying, I will reimburse you for any losses you have because I screwed up. Now, what that means is if a surety has to step in and complete a contract for you, and they spend $1 million completing that contract, they're going to knock on your door and they're going to say, hey, Eddie, let's work out a payment plan. How about you give me access to your stocks and bonds and your cash accounts? And they're going to want their $1 million back. So that's very different from insurance.
That is very different from insurance.
Wow.
Now, okay, subcontractor default insurance, let's go to that side of the equation.
Yeah, but
let's hit that now.
And I'm glad we covered surety before we just tried to define it, because it doesn't make sense unless you've already understood surety. So surety is that guarantee that this third party will step in with deep pockets and solve a problem if a contractor fails. That's what surety is. Typically, the general contractor level is where 95% of the surety happens. They buy surety bonds to supply to the owner saying they'll finish their work. In some cases, the general contractor will require a bond of their key subcontractors. So again, you get to that $100 million bridge and you've got a $20 million sub agreement with the asphalt paving company or the structural concrete company. If that's a separate company, you may say, hey, buddies, I want you to be bonded because I'm bonded upstream. I'm going to bond you downstream. So that's a subcontractor bond. Subcontractor default insurance is a product that has evolved much more recently than bonds to take the place of a sub bond. And I would say it's important to know the subcontractor default insurance world is a business opportunity, just like all other business opportunities. Hey, there's profit in that line of business. I'm going to write an insurance product that is going to take the place of a bond because I think I can make money on that insurance product. And the reason why that is, I already mentioned, sureties do a really good job of pre-qualifying contractors before they issue a bond. Well, surety loss ratios are extraordinarily low in history. If you do a really good job pre-qualifying a contractor and your requirements are very high before they go bid that work and get a bond, then you're guaranteeing that your loss experience, like the fact that they might default, is extraordinarily low. So what you've got in subcontractor default insurance is now you've got an insurance product that is saying, hey, if we do the pre-qual right, because it's all on the pre-qualification, if we do that part right, our subs are not going to fail. And the little known secret about subcontractor default insurance is most of it out there is actually a wholly owned product by the general contractor. So not to pick on any big names, but all these big national firms that we've all seen building the big mega projects, their subcontractor default insurance is a profit center for their company. And I don't think it's a scam or a bad thing at all, because they're providing a service in lieu of a subcontractor bond and they are taking risk. But make no mistake, it is a profit center for their business.
So they're gathering the premium.
Yep.
They're putting that in a pool.
Yep.
Then they're pre-qualifying this group of subcontractors that they are collecting premium from, and then they're using that pool to mitigate their own risk should somebody default.
Correct.
Pretty fair?
Absolutely fair. And the reason why they can self-insure that is they have a lot of projects. If you've got a $10 billion backlog and you go build a $600 million football stadium, might as well use that aggregated backlog to create subcontractor default insurance for each one of your subs on that football stadium. And then, by the way, if I'm the general contractor, I'm guaranteeing to the owner there will be no subcontractor defaults because I'm doing all the pre-qualification and I am self-insuring that subcontractor default insurance. So you, Mr. Owner, should pay me 1% or some number for the guarantee that there's not going to be any sub defaults.
So they're collecting on both sides.
They're collecting on both sides.
100%.
Yeah.
Yep.
And surety, you owe it back. Is the same true with the SDI?
In surety, you have pledged all of your personal assets that you will indemnify the surety company. So they won't come and take your home. There's a Homestead Act. They won't typically take your means of producing an income, so like your primary car or something like that. But they could sure take your stocks and bonds and the money you have in a bank account. That's how a surety works. The insurance contract is not written that way. So while you might say, excellent, this is more favorable to me as a subcontractor, the downside of that is you did sign an agreement to execute a scope of work for the contractor. You're still going to go to court, and the court could still award some financial damages that you then have to make right with your personal financials. It's a less direct way to access your personal financial wealth, but it's still on the hook because you signed a contract.